Hi everyone, Season 7 has been out for just about a week now, and as you can imagine probably I've been blasting pretty hard. I'm Paragon 260 something in hardcore, made a rogue, made a spiritborn. I generally had a pretty good time, but there is also a lot of stuff to talk about in terms of just observations, feedback that I have and that I have gathered from other people playing the game alongside me, coming to my Twitch chat or my YouTube chat, in my YouTube comments and so on. And of course, with PoE 2 out, our expectations might have shifted a little bit as well from what we expect from Diablo. So I want to go through that a little bit. I have gathered a few points that I want to discuss here. My state of Season 7 / feedback video here. So the topics I want to go through are the season theme itself, of course. We have finally gotten a season theme again that actually does something, which is somewhat of a novelty compared to the last like 3 seasons. Then the content itself, I want to talk about, just like where everything fits in and what I think could be improved. Of course, the balance between classes, builds, the different types of content and the progression that we have here as we go through the game and actually experience that type of content. And lastly, I do have my own wish list here. So I will try to keep this as brief as possible, but I would also really like to hear some of your own thoughts or how you agree or disagree with certain points I make here. Before we continue with the video, I want to give a shout out to today's sponsor, boot.dev. They've created a platform that makes it easier than ever to get into programming and polish your skills. They believe that the easiest way to learn code is to make sure that you're never bored, and this is why they have designed their courses to feel more like a game and less like a chore. The only way to really get into programming is to get your hands busy and write a ton of code, and this is exactly what the tasks allow you to do without ever feeling like you're getting stuck, because they have tons of tools to help you out. In these courses, you're going to learn backend programming from start to finish in the Python and Go languages. You can earn XP, levels, achievements, and even get on a global leaderboard if you want to get real competitive. And if you ever get stuck, you have Boots, the bear wizard AI that helps you out and understand the problem so that you can find a solution. The courses at boot.dev are designed to go deep, teach you the fundamentals, and make you build your first projects. Compared to attending a university course, boot.dev is a way cheaper solution and allows you the flexibility of doing it all at your own pace and from home. They offer both a monthly and annual subscription, and you can cancel in the first 30 days, no questions asked. So if you really want to learn coding and that convinces you, then go check out boot.dev with the link in the description or the pinned comment below, and you get 25% off your first payment to boot.dev by clicking that link or using my code. And now, let's go back to the video. Now, let's talk about the season theme. So this is kind of like the big thing, I guess, for Season 7. We got the witch powers. They are very reminiscent of a combination between the malignant hearts from Season 1 and the vampire powers from Season 2. But I guess they do have some nice twists. They are definitely more elegantly designed, I would say, and a little more sophisticated. In Season 2, for example, of the vampire powers, we just chose 5 of them, whatever you wanted, and that was pretty much it. There was not really like combo potential, and now you actually have to think about, okay, how many of the same powers do you have? How do they synergize together? How does that go with the occult gems that you choose? So I think in general, they have done a relatively good job at kind of like making something new and fresh, even though it looks fairly similar compared to what we had. Now, obviously, it is somewhat uninspired because it's basically just taking a bunch of Witch Doctor stuff from Diablo 3 and then, bringing back 2 season themes together that we already had, kind of. So I would have definitely liked to see something a bit more fresh and novel. But I guess overall the season has been relatively well accepted, at least for the theme. So I don't really hear a lot of complaints outside of, okay, a few things are a little bit buggy or something. And yeah, there were like some fixes that had to do with some of the powers. But overall, I think the witch powers definitely do add something interesting to the game. Now, that is another point I want to discuss later, which is also the power creep that comes with that. Of course, we didn't have any borrowed power themes lately, and now we do, on top of getting a multitude of buffs for all builds everywhere. So it seems kind of strange to me that such a borrowed power theme comes with an overall buff to basically everything in the game. I feel like that should be either one or the other and not both at the same time, because you also see that things are getting really out of hand, but more on that in a moment. I want to talk about the gems. So one thing that I hear a lot is that people just can't really get their gems crafted. It takes so many fragments to craft, and you need to find the skulls, and people just found the headhunts like all day long. It also took me, I don't know, 30 hours plus or so of farming headhunts, at least pre-buff, before they actually raised the rot income lately, to even get like most of my stuff kind of in a good shape and have the stuff that I actually wanted. So I think that's a kind of long grind for just the season theme. I think it's maybe okay to kind of like, you know, have something really powerful locked behind such a long grind, but it feels also weird that people can't even like really finish their build or even like, you know, have like a certain important combo online up to that point. We also have, for example, the Forgotten Altars that I hear people complain about in my chat all day. They can't find those altars. I hear people actually like selling spots for their party when they find one so that people can go and click the altar so they get their powers. Maybe that was a little bit on the stingy side, I guess, with people just not being able to get it. On the other hand, yeah, it is kind of refreshing to see that it is actually something to work towards compared to pretty much most of the rest of the game, where yeah, you just kind of get the character online super fast and easily these days. Now, the headhunt zones. I think they are actually relatively well designed. So whispers have been kind of on the back burner for most people, and I think the new headhunt zones make them relatively interesting, at least. There's a lot of juice there. Usually we used to do that in Hell Tides lately, and before that it was just kind of like random whisper farming, but I don't think many people really used to do that before the Hell Tides got so buffed lately. And now we have this. And it is definitely nice to do some whisper farming. I think maybe we're doing a bit too much for my taste. I would rather see more instance content, more different types of content, and the whispers also get somewhat repetitive. But I think overall they are well designed, and I would like to see, you know, something of the season theme like kind of stick around in the future with, for example, you know, revamped whispers across the board. We have seen that, for example, after season 2. Later in season 4, when the Helltide rework happened, that was very similar to what we had with the Bloodtide in season 2, but the season theme, I could imagine we're gonna get something like that in the future as well, with the headhunt zones maybe coming back in some form. I think right now maybe the objectives are a little bit too one-sided and too one-dimensional, and it'll be nice to see just more stuff there. Maybe also something that involves like the local events, for example, or, you know, these kind of things. I think generally the fact that we have like these different types of whispers that exist, for example, with world bosses and Cursed Undercity and the pit run and so on, it's kind of nice to like give you a little bit of an incentive to break up the farming, whatever you're doing right now, and then go do another thing, at least for once, and then maybe go back to what we were doing. And I would like to see more of that and more like kind of like open world stuff as well. That is a bit more spread out and not the same like 4 zones all the time, because you kind of see the same places all the time. You go to the same waypoints all the time. So it is a little bit like one-sided with how much we're doing those headhunt zones, but I think overall they are relatively well designed. And then we have the Raven. So I'm not talking about the Raven pet, I'm talking about the Raven where you can turn in the whispers. I think that's a very good addition. And we definitely need something like that, like, I don't know, permanently everywhere, kind of. Like, I've been begging Blizzard as well to at least raise the cap of how many Grim Favors you can carry at once, because it happens so often that, you know, you go around, do some whispers, and then, you know, for example, in Helltide, right before you kill the Blood Maiden, there is some other guy spawning a Hellborn, and then that Hellborn objective completes. And then you have your full Grim Favors, the Blood Maiden spawns, you don't get the reward. It feels really bad. And I think that there needs to be some like, kind of like more permanent feature here that allows us to maybe do multiple turn-ins at once at the Tree of Whispers, for example, or have the Raven with us, like whenever we finish the 10 Grim Favors, it just like flies to your side and you can turn it in, or something like that. I'm not sure why this has not changed like in the last 1.5 years, but it has always bothered me. And we do run into those situations pretty frequently. So yeah, overall, to like wrap this up here, I gotta say the season theme was probably a relatively good success, at least from my perspective here. It is somewhat grindy, but a lot of people are also asking for a bit more grindiness. And why we want to do this is something I want to go into in a second here. But yeah, I think the season theme, while very uninspired and relatively boring, considering we've already seen basically exactly the same thing in the past, I think it went relatively well. So I hope that maybe something of this will stick around. Maybe even the occult gems might be like a new type of, you know, legendary gems we will have permanently going forward, or at least, you know, something along those lines that we can work towards as like a long-term goal throughout the season, for example. Maybe those witch powers could also be reintroduced in some form. Maybe not as, you know, items as we have seen that in the past, for example, with, you know, like the Marshan rings or, you know, some other legendary aspects that were introduced after season 1 or season 2. We already have so many items to choose from. There's a lot of pressure on every single slot on our gear. We don't need more items, really. We don't really need just like another, you know, buff to a certain skill or something like that. It would be very interesting to actually have these kind of like, you know, combo potential powers that are outside of the realm of the typical character progression. So I think it would be nice to maybe introduce some new permanent feature here in the future that kind of has what this witch power stuff offers. Now let's talk about the content here. So especially the, you know, just what we do outside of the headhunts. So for some people that actually have thought about, you know, not just doing whisper farming and maybe the pit, there is actually a lot of stuff in the game. So we have the Undercity, the Helltide, Nightmare Dungeons, the Citadel, the Tormented Bosses, and yeah, simply there is a lot of stuff that has been introduced to the game where I feel like we don't really care that much anymore. Like personally, I've not done really any Helltide. I've done like one Helltide to get my season journey challenge done, and that was it. It's just completely pointless to farm it right now, I feel. And yeah, okay, it's a different type of thing to farm that, you know, if you just kind of want to do something else, but it's not really that different anyway from like the headhunts, for example. You go around in the open world, you kill some stuff, and okay, there's a bit more fire raining from the sky and there's more demons showing up, but it's effectively the same thing as headhunts when you think about it. There's like a boss that spawns sometimes, there's some whispers, you get the same stuff, and there's not really a reason to go to Helltide, I feel. So this is like one of those things where I feel it has kind of just been like, you know, supplanted by the season theme, and we need to make sure that there's not too much overlap between the different types of content. And I'd rather see something a bit more, you know, specialized in other ways, something like more out of the ordinary. But more importantly, I think we need to have more reasons to do certain types of content. Right now, we don't really have much of a reason to go anywhere besides the season theme zone, and then yeah, maybe some bosses to get a few uniques, and the rest is just pit farming. And, you know, Nightmare Dungeons, okay, you want to get a bit of Opticide, but you can also get some, you know, tributes, and you don't really need that much of it anyway. And then you have Undercity, which, yeah, okay, you have like tons of tributes that are dropping all the time, but it's generally not really rewarding. And then you have yeah, Hordes, which is just kind of really nerfed. I wouldn't really recommend Hordes for anything at this point. And Citadel, that basically no one is doing at all. So this is kind of the stuff that we're looking at here, and I feel like we just don't really have enough reasons to go anywhere into these different types of contents. So outside of like getting something very special like the Opticide that you can get in Hordes or in Nightmare Dungeons and the tributes, yeah, there's not really any reason ever to go into any of those types of content. So I think we need a little bit more like target farming, maybe a little bit more like character like progression that we actually have some kind of player agency for. So what I mean is that maybe we could, you know, use the Undercity as a target farming tool a little bit better. That it had some bugs in the past that have now been addressed, where, for example, you use like some of the tributes or the bargains and they weren't really interacting with each other. So apparently that stuff is better now, but it doesn't really incentivize me to go to Undercity and farm it over just doing more pits, for example. I can do pits and I can overall gamble whatever I need. I don't need to try to go to the Undercity and then get a certain thing. So one example would be to just take those boons or like the bargains that we have and just make them way more costly, for example, and also just way more impactful. You know, let me go there and like, you know, drop 500 million gold and then get like 10 ancestral amulets or something like that. I want something to actually really go there, use the wealth I have acquired over, you know, a few dozen hours or maybe hundreds of hours, and then actually just hunt down that last elusive piece of my gear that I just can't get. You know, I want something like that. I feel like this is like completely missing. And Undercity with those bargains, it is a good start, but nothing has been done to really make it more better. And this is the same thing that I see in all of the other systems as well. Like, we have gotten a lot of balance changes, we've gotten the season theme, it's all kind of nice, but nothing was done to any of the actual content. There was no changes to how Undercity plays. There was no changes to, you know, how Nightmare Dungeon play. And I feel like there's still so much low-hanging fruit here with how we could make those types of content better, more exciting, give them more identity, more target farming. and it's all just kind of like, yeah, a wash basically. Especially Nightmare Dungeons, I feel, could become a content type that is way more interesting in the future as well, where maybe we could have, you know, some form of, you know, crafting on those sigils, or some form of, you know, like for example the Atlas passive tree from Path of Exile, where we can actually customize the experience. Like, why do we not have any of the like season content in Nightmare Dungeons, for example? Why do we not have the Millennium guys and the vampires and the constructs and all that kind of stuff showing up in Nightmare Dungeons, at least with a small chance, and then maybe, you know, they drop certain specific things that you can only get there, and, you know, kind of like hold some of the value of this season theme that we used to have in the past, and bring back, you know, some kind of progression angle for your character. And then you can try to like specialize into farming this thing or that thing. Maybe you can trade whatever you find with others as well, so that if you really like farming a certain thing, you can do that a little bit more. And just in general, just we need a little bit more of like this, you know, a reason to go there, a way to customize the experience. Because right now, I think every single Diamond Dungeon is kind of just like the same. You rush through, you get a bunch of Opticide. We don't even have a Nightmare Dungeon tier list anymore. We decided to discontinue it because it's like so, yeah, it's just a wash basically. And most people don't even go there anymore. So I think there could be a lot more done here. Also, like the affixes could be a lot more interesting. I feel like all of them don't really matter at all. In fact, Blizzard has started removing most of the affixes at this point. There's not even like a massive difference between run to run. There's not really something where I feel like something changes, because the affixes are just not even noticeable at this point. So it's, yeah, a little bit weird, I think, the spot that Nightmare Dungeons find themselves in. And that could also be improved. Yeah, Citadel, I don't really have that much to say about it, besides the fact that, yeah, I guess try again if you want. But yeah, here no one is really doing Citadel. There is no reason to go there, which I guess to some degree is also good, because you don't really want to force people into multiplayer. That will really outrage a lot of people. But on the other hand, I also feel like I don't even have a reason to go there at all. So maybe this is just the intended way. Maybe it's just there to farm a few cosmetics and that's it. But it seems like, considering this was one of the two big new types of content advertised for the expansion, it has been forgotten relatively fast. At least Undercity, I do it from time to time, because, for example, I might get like a big tribute or something, or I might really need some Opticide, and I use my refinement tributes. So yeah, there is a reason to go there, but it's also way too streamlined, way too little, like, you know, like something like that is a dopamine hit basically. I could go in, I know what I get, and the run is always the same. It's always the same levels. There's nothing special popping up or something. Like these bosses that appear there, they just explode in 1 second. The goblins, whatever, you know. So I think there needs to be something more interesting here, and maybe the same for Citadel in the future as well. And lastly, for the bossing, I feel like we have also lost a little bit of the identity here with bosses. With, you know, we used to have certain types of content that give you certain boss materials, and now I feel like it's just like also so washed out, and everything just drops everywhere in insane quantities, because, you know, elites just pop out boss mats all the time, the goblins drop out the boss mats all the time, and it's kind of nice to get this stuff a little bit, and it's kind of nice that we can farm the uniques that we want, you know, at the target location. And, you know, I like that we go do those bosses and do like a little world tour with a party, farm all the bosses a little bit, and then you get a bunch of stuff. But I feel, yeah, the bosses are just not really interesting. So it's just, you know, even on Torment 4, we basically just walk in and one-shot them. And if for some reason you don't have anyone in the party who can one-shot the boss on Torment 4, well, he's gonna do it on Torment 3, and except you're gonna get like 20% less loot. And, you know, with the Torment system, for example, we don't really have like a real way to make the boss fights in any way like engaging, challenging, or anything like that, because people just always go with like the path of least resistance and just one-shot them, or yeah, invite someone who can basically. So this is kind of my experience here, and that is kind of sad to see, because when those tormented bosses came out, I had a really good time fighting them, taking them down. We had like a hardcore race to like the first kills. We had a lot of people ripping on some of those bosses in that race, for example, and those fights actually lasted like multiple minutes the first time around, and that has kind of just completely disappeared, and there's no excitement at all in doing those bosses. And on top of this, we have to like summon them over and over and over, like dozens of times, hundreds of times, and it's just kind of like a loot pinata in the end, where you just don't do anything. You collect the loot, you do the 5 kills, You go to town, you salvage, you repeat, and you do this for a few hours. Then you have a bunch of 1GA or 2GA uniques that you need for your character, maybe a few mythics that you also need, and then you're basically done. So this is like my experience with bosses, and it's just like extremely boring. This is like the least engaging part of the entire game right now, but it's kind of just a chore you have to go through, and I'd really love to see some kind of like massive reduction in boss mats or something, but the boss fights are way more rewarding and way more engaging. Like I wouldn't mind like literally like giving him times 20 the HP or something like that, and you know, together with some other like balancing changes, nerfs to like the OP builds and stuff, but also, you know, make them drop only ancestrals in Torment 4, for example, up their mythic drop rate, you know, that kind of stuff. Because just standing in like the Duriel pit or, you know, in front of Rashan and summoning him, and I don't even have to press a button because someone else, you know, has the Cataclysm running in the corner, and this Druid is just like one-tapping the boss with the Cataclysm before I even ever get to press a button. It's just like extremely boring, and it doesn't really produce a good image for the game as well. Like the boss fights are actually kind of fine if they last a little bit and if the bosses are actually somewhat dangerous. But right now we don't have any of that, and I really like to see that change in the future. Now, speaking of balance, I've talked a lot about the content now, and I've also like mentioned a few things here, but yeah, we do have a lot of very overpowered builds. This is partly due to the season theme, but also partly because we basically just keep getting buffs. I mean, not getting nerfs. And that is a bit of a problem. Like we see now that we have Necros that have already cleared 150s. We have Druids that are getting really close as far as I know, or maybe have done it too. And the same with Barbs as well. So we have 3 different classes, 3 different builds that are, to my knowledge, not bugged, or at least not very bugged. Unlike the Spiritborn that we saw in like Season 6, for example, that was, you know, bugged to infinity and did like 10,000 times the damage it should have. Now we have legitimate builds that can do pit 150, and that is ridiculous. Like the thing is that the gap between Torment 4 content and the pit 150 is, you know, like this is a factor of, I don't know, like 1,000 or 10,000 or something like that in terms of the damage output needed in order to overcome those challenges. And I think that no build should fit anywhere close to a pit 150. It is supposed to be like an infinite system. Why do we have people actually capping out at the highest tier? And how is that supposed to keep anything else in the game in any way, you know, challenging or engaging, and, you know, more than just like a one-shot fest that I just described with the bosses, for example? If you have these kind of builds in the game, then how do we even have like any other content that is fun, that is not just okay, everything just explodes on sight? Now, I totally understand that some people also really like feeling that overpowered, but I feel like we're getting to that point where you don't really have to even work for it. You just kind of like play the game a little bit, you get to level 60, you progress to Torment 4 really fast, you just become overpowered really quickly, especially on the stronger builds, like if you're looking at the, you know, the S or A tier builds, but even on the weaker builds. Like I was playing some builds that are kind of like the mid-range builds, like Dance of Knives, for example, or something like that. And even there, I felt ridiculously overpowered. I take down tormented bosses in format parties in seconds. And, you know, I blast through like pit 80s in 2 minutes or something like that. Like, it's kind of ridiculous how far we've come here. And this is still on one of the weaker builds, basically. And like, you have other builds that are actually speed farming something like 120s or 130s or something like that. And it just goes way too far in my book. And on the other side, we have the underpowered builds that just struggle so hard to even get into Torment 4, that are still so weak and underpowered, and just can't really reach there unless you are, you know, really knowing what you're doing, and then you really grind it out, you really get good gear and masterwork it up and all that kind of stuff, and then maybe get to the point where you can kind of be comfortable. So I think there's like this massive disconnect here between the good and the bad builds, and it seems like the gap is only just increasing if we discount the Spiritborn bugs from Season 6. I think Season 6 was actually relatively well balanced, and if the bugs hadn't existed for Spiritborn back then all the classes would have actually been like in a fairly good spot balance-wise overall, I think. And I was just talking about the best builds, but like the overall meta definitely was way closer together than it is now. Now we have this insane gap of some builds literally doing like 1,000 times more damage without any bugs than others. And I think that is just a gap that is a very weak performance from the balancing team, to say the very least. If I can give my 2 cents on this, I would say that we should probably aim to bring all the classes to roughly where Spiritborn and Sork are landing right now. So these are the bottom 2 classes in the mix. and they are still doing fairly fine. You know, they can do very easy Torment 4 content. They can blast to like Pit 100 plus or something like that with various builds. And I think this is kind of what we should be aiming for here. And we generally need to bring down a lot of builds to roughly that level. And I think it's a very unhealthy trajectory that we're on right now with just buffs, 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 buffs on top of the season theme. Like, it's getting out of control really fast, and we are really risking to slip into the same, you know, scenario that Diablo 3 found itself in, where after many seasons of just buffing, 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 we just had like these, you know, 150 speedruns, and, you know, nothing in the game matters anymore. You know, Torment 16 is trivial and these kind of things. And that is a real risk that we are basically already starting to experience here. And it just makes it so that basically the entire rest of the game becomes very outdated, you know, very trivial. And the entire like progression, the path from level 1 all the way to Torment 4 and then beyond in the pit is just way too like compressed basically because of that. Because you get to 60 and then, you know, on a good build, you kind of just immediately go all the way to Torment 4, and there's almost no progression left, going from Torment 1 to Torment 2 to Torment 3 and so on. And that is a real problem, I think. And the solution is not just to add more Torment levels like Diablo 3 has done, because why do we have all these Torment levels if we just kind of skip through them anyway? If you just, you know, do like 5 pit runs and then boom, you unlocked Torment 4 or something. Like, what's the point of even having those Torment difficulties in the first place? So I think we need a kind of like overall rebalance here of the builds, of maybe even the difficulty levels that we have, and something needs to change here big time in the future. I think another big problem that we have here is also that we just like have so many multipliers to stack on all of our gear and the paragons and so on. We have so much stuff that just works together, and this also leads to the problem that a lot of people don't actually really understand how everything works together when they look at a build. There are so many, you know, different little details that can make or break the performance of a build. And, you know, we have these build guides. You know, I work on the Maxwell guides, I have my videos and my theory crafting I do on stream and these kind of things. And I get 1,000 questions about every single build, like every single day. And okay, this is what I'm here for. You know, I like doing this kind of stuff, but it seems like the game has just also kind of been complicated to the point where a lot of people can't really follow or understand why certain builds are so strong. And it seems like neither can the devs, to be honest. Because if we look at stuff like Blood Wave, that just was buffed to the moon this patch for basically no reason, really. We did have relatively solid Blood Wave based build in Season 6, for example, that was, I think, in S or in A tier as well. And then Blizzard just decided to do like a times 1,000 on it or something. And the same thing happened with Cataclysm, for example. And it just seems very weird and unexplainable to me. And really the main culprit here is that we just like stack multiply in every single slot these days. Like even all of the defensive slots that we have on our gear that were supposed to, you know, make it so that you have a bit of a balanced character. You know, there is like a certain amount of defense you need to hit in order to survive. And then there's, you know, this kind of damage that you can stack in order to deal the most damage. And it seemed like it was way easier to balance back when we didn't have stuff like Call of the Nameless or Air of Perdition or Tybalt's Will or, you know, Shroud of False Death. You know, all these like defensive slots have now been power crept into even more damage multipliers. For example, we're getting these like offensive chess pieces like the reworked Scoundrel's Letters and this new Hoda Earthquake chest that the barbs have now. And we just see more and more of this where, you know, the previously defensive slots are now power crept into more damage. And we don't care about losing that kind of defense because the game is just so easy and monsters don't hurt you anyway, basically. Like, I asked some people in my chat the other day, and I was like, guys, when was actually the last time you died on your character? And of course, people die. You know, not everyone is like playing like me or, you know, has this like hardcore mindset that I just kind of like have ingrained in me right now after, you know, many years of blasting ARPGs. But it's certainly noticeable, I think, to everyone that the game has become ridiculously easy to survive compared to what it was in the past. And I think it's not a bad thing that you can kind of like turn off your brain and just blast a little bit and, you know, not really worry about all kinds of stuff and dying and so on all the time. But it seems like we don't even have a risk of dying anywhere if you don't want to. Like, I have not actually lost a single hardcore character in, I don't know, for as long as I can remember at this point. Like, the last character I lost was like before the expansion, and I've played Season 6 for like 700 hours or something like that. And that is kind of insane to me. And I'm not saying this to brag or something. It's just that usually I would lose, I don't know, a handful of hardcore characters easily, I think, per season, depending on how recklessly I play and, you know, what I do exactly and what is kind of the big challenge that I'm going for example, or so. But it's just kind of like very striking to me that, yeah, especially in hardcore, I feel like it doesn't even feel that much like hardcore anymore. I've barely seen anyone rip. I haven't ripped myself. And yeah, overall, it seems like with especially the expansion difficulty revamps, the game has become a lot easier, and at least on the survival side. So I think that's also something that might need a bit of a, you know, address. We need some more threat, honestly. It doesn't have to be like a constant threat, like every single monster just suddenly does like triple the damage or something like that. But maybe, you know, some elites that can pop up, like some new special elites or like those, you know, triple affix elites. Maybe they could just be beefier and, you know, occasionally you run into them and you actually have a bit of a fight. Or, you know, the bosses, like all of the pit bosses and so on, they're kind of a joke. And okay, we have the, you know, shadows that spawn and they throw some stuff at you. We have the stacking buff there, but it's not really, you know, so crazy and it's so exciting or it's so challenging to survive that stuff, I think. So it's kind of like, yeah, the game has become like easy mode. And yeah, again, I understand that some people like that, but I feel like it also, like, long term will just drive people away more and more and more because there's simply, you know, nothing that really gets your heart pumping. Like, even on softcore, I feel like there needs to be sometimes, you know, something that happens that kind of keeps you on your toes. And that just went completely missing with the expansion. Long story short, we need a lot better balancing. We need to definitely nerf a lot of the top builds, in my opinion. And I guess we'll see what happens in season 8, if we get another power creep season or like a borrowed power season or not. I guess if, for example, the witch powers and the gems completely drop out with no replacement, then we're already gonna see a lot of stuff coming down, and maybe it's gonna be okay with like a few tweaks to like the really crazy builds. But yeah, overall, yeah, we definitely need to close the gap here. The gap has increased a lot and it has not been closed in season 7. So that is definitely what I see here, and that is a problem. Tormentor bosses, I talked about those already. Now let's talk about the pinnacle challenges. So this was something that was advertised in the campfire chat before the season. The new last step of the season journey that gives you the pet that is supposed to be, you know, somewhat of a challenge and stuff like that. Well, okay, I get that, you know, I'm like a speedrunner and I'm very experienced with Diablo and all that, but I completed this last step before I completed chapter 4 or chapter 3 even, I don't know. Like, I actually had to go through like another 3 steps or something to even actually unlock that reward in the end, because I hadn't done the trivial early game stuff before I finished this part. And I'm not saying this to brag, I'm just saying that it's a complete joke. And I think it's fine that, you know, you get people this pet and, you know, everyone has access to it and stuff like that. But advertising it as some kind of pinnacle challenge is absolutely false advertising, I gotta say. So I would really like to see something more here, something like a, you know, extra step or 2 or 3 even, that go beyond what we have in the current season journey. Something that doesn't give you any, you know, like permanent reward, let's say, like a title or, you know, wings or something. But it could be even like a pure, like, kind of a gameplay reward, you know, just boom, like 100 excellent shards or Duriel, or, you know, boom, 10 billion gold or something like that. You know, something that you kind of want to hunt down, but it's also not really, you know, make or break if you don't get it, or you can just farm it in other ways, for example. But, you know, something that is actually really hard that almost no one can actually complete. And something to strive for, something to maybe, you know, wrap your head around, maybe make a certain build for just to do that one challenge. I would like to see this kind of stuff. I think we need a lot more things to kind of like hunt down, especially once you are in the end game, once you have a cool character and like the build and blast for everything. And I think, yeah, that could be some actual cool pinnacle challenge here. And then maybe you can like show it off in the end with, I don't know what that could be, but I think the pinnacle challenges here are definitely missing, and we need a lot more of that. And in fact, talking about pinnacle challenges, this is also something that kind of leads us back here to the existing content. I think we just need more like higher end versions of basically all of this kind of stuff that we saw here. Blizzard has tried this in the past with, for example, the tormented bosses that we had back in season 4 when the Stygian Stones were still in the game and the pit came out and this kind of stuff. And I think that was a relatively nice system because you were still able to kind of like easy peasy farm whatever you wanted from them with the normal versions of the bosses. But then we also had the tormented versions that were actual challenges, were actually cool fights. And, you know, there was nothing that anyone was really missing from not doing them. And, you know, that was okay. But I think we need exactly something like that for all of the other types of content as well. There was, for example, the Infernal Hordes, like tier, I don't know, 9 and 10, I think, or something, that Blizzard has talked about at some point, but then never introduced in Season 5. So some kind of like uber Infernal Hordes that was supposed to come, but never happened. And I think this is exactly what we need. What if we just do Infernal Hordes and let's say every 20 runs or something, you drop like a key for the Uber Infernal Horde, and that Uber Infernal Horde has like 50 waves and it actually takes like 2 hours to complete, and it just kind of keeps scaling and everything goes crazy. You have like a ton of boons, you have the fire raining everywhere, the monsters get harder and harder every wave, and then at the end you get like, you know, some special reward that you can only get there. You know, for example, bring back the Millennium Hearts and they drop there or something like that, you know. So something cool to hunt down once you have a really cool and strong character, you know, something to work towards with a good build, and then maybe eventually take that down. And you could also have, you know, the option to, for example, allow people to farm normal hordes, get that key and just sell it to someone who can actually farm it if they're feeling like they're too weak themselves. You know, maybe they could, you know, at least get something out of that and then just, you know, eventually buy the thing that drops from those Uber hordes, for example. So I think there could be stuff like this. Same thing with the Undercity, for example, you know, some kind of like tribute that drops that, you know, makes the run super challenging, but you also get some incredible reward. You get a guaranteed mythic drop at the end, and, you know, maybe some other special reward you can get there only. Or maybe it supercharges the bargains and makes them like 10 times more potent. And you know, as I said earlier, like give me like 10 amulets, maybe make it 50 amulets that drop all ancestral at the end, or something like that, you know, where occasionally you have this like really tough challenge that you can go for, you know, as I mentioned earlier, with like, you know, this something that gets your heart pumping, something that keeps you on your toes. I think we need more of that kind of stuff, you know. Even with just getting the key for this, just like the entry ticket to go into this run should be like a huge dopamine hit when I finally find one. I'm like, oh yeah, let's go. I'm not ready yet, but I will save this for later. And then I come back and I will do this thing. And I think we need exactly this kind of stuff here for all these different types of content that we already have. I think it wouldn't even be, you know, necessarily that crazy to introduce this, because we don't talk about introducing a whole new system with like a whole new artwork and all this kind of stuff. Of course, it would be nice to see, you know, any kind of tweaks that would make sense here, but I feel like a lot of it can be done with relatively little effort here, just to give people some kind of chase, some kind of cool reward at the end of the progression to actually hunt down, because that is really needed and missing. And that also brings me to the last big topic here, the progression. So I talked about this a little bit already with like, you know, we kind of like fast forward really quickly into Torment 4. I feel like 1 to 60 is kind of a joke at all. Like, we don't really do much there anyway. It's just, okay, first character of the season, you spend like a few hours, you get to 60, and then you kind of keep going. And then after that, for all the future characters, you either get carried, or you have like, you know, ridiculous power from the Witch Beam and from your mythics, and, you know, all of your aspects are prepared. Or, you know, you just like boost yourself with the caches, for example. A lot of people do that. They just like open 10 caches and boom, you're level 50, you're level like half an hour and you're done. So it feels like 1 to 60 is kind of trivial. And also compared to, for example, how it used to be, I feel like there is no purpose behind the 1 to 60 experience. At least in the past, when we still had the capstone dungeons, I could try to rush into Torment or World Tier 4, for example. And then once I was there with my level, you know, 40 character or level 50 character or whatever, I would actually progress all of the endgame systems. I could get my glyphs, I could farm boss mats, I could farm Helltides, Whispers, whatever, and all of it would actually help me progress towards my endgame goal. I would farm, you know, all this kind of endgame stuff right away after like just a little bit of playing. But here I feel like you go 1 to 60 and everything on the way there is completely irrelevant. And this also means that people just want to skip it as much as possible. So I think that's kind of sad to see. Personally, I kind of like the early game that I enjoyed on, like, you know, all of the different builds that I played in the past. And I feel like with the way that the game works right now, I don't have any incentive at all to ever level a character again outside of literally the very first one in a season. And that makes me a little bit sad. So it would be nice if there was like, some kind of reason here at least to do 1 to 60 again on an alt. But yeah, I'm not really sure how this could be done. But yeah, maybe we could just, open up some kind of like extra difficulty mode. Maybe allow us to go into Torment 1, for example, even at level 1 or something like that, where maybe we can actually immediately start focusing on endgame content in some way. Go into, any type of like endgame stuff like Infernal Hordes that only unlocks, I think, in Torment as well. Maybe it's just allow us to do this kind of stuff on a low level character, at least on alt. Maybe there's like some kind of progression step on the way. Once your first character reaches 60, you unlock that kind of feature, for example. I kind of like the early game experience because it's so different, especially slower paced from the end game. And there's like this kind of like, discovery as you make your character and you find the first aspects and you kind of like tweak stuff all the time. I just really like that part of the game, but it has gone completely missing outside of like one character per season. And I'm kind of sad about that. But yeah, for the rest of the progression, I talked about this. I think Torment 1 to 4 is way too fast, especially for the good builds these days. In some cases, you have like these, single items that just like supercharge your build, like let's talk about Casimire's Legacy, for example, or stuff like Fresh and Winter Glass. We have like single items that do way too much for a single build, that once you get them, suddenly like 10 times more powerful, or way more than that in some cases. And I think no item shouldn't give you that much in one single slot, basically. So that's a bit of a problem, and this also kind of like trivializes some of those torment steps that we see here, and which people just rush through it way too fast. Like when I started this season, I was playing Dance on Knives, and I was in Torment 4 after like 10 hours or something like that, on hardcore, playing completely solo on a B tier build. So it was a bit of a joke, I gotta say. And yeah, okay, again, I'm a speedrunner and all that, but yeah, that is too fast. That is straight up too fast. This should not happen, I think. And Torment 1 is already supposed to be, a type of content where you can get everything, where, initially Blizzard decided that, okay, this is where you kind of start in the end game. You can have everything, but you're going to be more efficient on the higher torments. But it feels like now everyone just kind of like expects to be in Torment 4 and Torment 4 only, basically right away, as soon as possible. And there's, just very burning need for everyone to kind of just ignore the other torment difficulties. And the standard is, okay, you have to Torment 4, you have to one-shot everything, and there's like nothing really that goes in another direction here. So I'm not really sure how to do this, like what to do about this as well, like what suggestion to give. I just feel like the progression is too fast. Especially Torment 1 and Torment 2 don't matter enough. At least in Torment 3, you may spend a bit of time on like your first character, trying to progress through it and so on. But yeah, maybe this could be shifted a little bit. And for example, like, the first torments, you kind of go through them so fast because you get a lot of multipliers, stacking up. You get your glyphs, you get your first legendaries, you get your first uniques and so on. And your power, rises by the minute basically. And then it slowly draws out a little bit longer. And then, you spend a little more time in the higher torments until you reach Torment 4. But I feel like it's just not really going that well right now. Then we have masterworking. This is another big topic, I guess, that kind of keeps coming up all the time. And my suggestion in the past for this was that maybe we should just be able to reset only 4 ranks at a time and not all ranks at a time. My main argument for this is that in order to try to improve an existing item that you have, that you are using, you have to first make your character weaker and then have a chance to maybe make a character better. But you also have a very high risk of just ending up with less until you have more materials. So what it does is that you kind of just don't masterwork, and especially don't remasterwork your items, especially those that you have equipped. And you kind of just like, pool a lot of mats until you can be relatively sure that you will hit the result that you're trying to hit. And I think that's kind of like a bad incentive to have. I find myself just kind of like masterworking my items once when I get them with whatever masterworking mats I have, just trying to get some kind of somewhat acceptable result, and then I just kind of leave them there and then never go back to actually trying to finish the item with like the right hits on all the right stats, unless it's really necessary. So that's kind of like a stupid system, I think. and making it so that we can only research 4 ranks at a time instead of all ranks at a time would actually allow us to, actually progress an item and, slowly get to the state of perfection that we want, instead of this, just raw gamble where every time we reset it, we have this high risk of just making ourselves worse, and on top of it, losing hours and hours of farming materials at the same time. So that is just like a really feels bad man moment, and I think a lot of people probably have the same issue here, that you really want to try to get a triple master crit, but you have this double that's already pretty good, and you don't really want to risk it. And it's just kind of like not how it should be in my book. I think at this point, most people are probably kind of over it when it comes to masterworking and this RNG fiesta. The cost is really high already. And I think, even though it would make it much easier to hit the masterworking outcomes that you want, it would also be a lot more satisfying to progress your gear instead of just kind of like leaving it there and not really, giving a fuck basically anymore. Then another point here is also GA loot, in particular, the lack of GAs. I think especially this season, a lot of people have noticed that like this insane flood of items that, especially it happens in headhunts with like, the cocoons dropping items all the time, left and right. You get like these whisper caches all the time and all that kind of stuff. You get so much loot. It's crazy. And in fact, I actually completely stopped looting all items that are not ancestral. And this is something I have never done in the past because it was always kind of important for salvage materials and so on, especially when you make like, 10 or 15 different builds like me in the season. You need a lot of salvage, you need a lot of stuff to like masterwork and whatever. But we get way too much of that, and I can actually just leave everything on the ground, which is a good thing, to be honest, on one hand, because it's just way too much loot. I don't want to pick all that stuff up. On the other hand, why is it even dropping? Like, why do we get non-ancestral items at all in Torment 4, for example? This is the highest difficulty in the game. I don't care about anything potentially non-ancestral. Like, there's no way that I would ever pick up any item that is non-ancestral when I'm in Torment 4. At the very least, given with what I explained about, the progression being more meaningful and, hopefully we get a bit more of like a longevity in like the grind towards Torment 4, you will have ancestral pieces in every single slot at that point. Especially if this stuff becomes a little bit harder and a little bit longer progression. But generally, expectation is that you are in Torment 4 and you have full 800 item power gear. I don't need any 750 loot there at all. There's no purpose behind it, and I would rather just see it literally deleted with no compensation compared to what we have right now. Because at least then I would not get baited into looking at my minimap and seeing a star and thinking, is this an item I want to pick up or not? So at least I would know there is an item that I want to go and pick up when there's only ancestrals. So that's something here. And I think in general, yeah, maybe like the amount of loot drops and also like stuff like, fine tuning the affix rolls, the affix weights on some gear. For example, amulets is always like a big topic of discussion here. The passive ranks on amulets. It's nice that they are like really hard to get items, but maybe it's a bit too punishing when it comes to trying to roll for certain things, for example. And I would like to see maybe also some tweaks being made here just to like kind of smooth out this whole progression curve a little bit. I just feel like I get like 1 GA items with like acceptable stats on every single slot. Then I masterwork them to some kind of acceptable outcome, usually very cheaply. Most of the time I don't even go to 12 anymore at this point. I just go to like 8 or something on my masterworks, and then just kind of leave it there. And there's not really too much really to hunt down. Speaking of like this point here as well of the endgame chase, I talked about, for example, uber hordes or some super uber bosses and whatever. If we actually have any kind of reason, especially outside of the pit, to really min-max our character and have the strongest character possible to even have a chance of not failing certain type of content, then we would actually have something to strive for, something to go for, and make our characters the best they can be. But right now, I don't feel that way at all. If I can speed farm like pit 80 in 2 minutes, then why would I even try to make my character stronger? Like, I don't get any reward for going higher anyway. I just try to make like the fastest possible version of a build, speedrun pits for whatever tier I can between 70, 80 or 90, and this is basically all you need. And then there's nothing else to go for, and that's kind of a sad story, to be honest. And that also pretty much sums up what I got here for now. I still have this wish list that I can go through briefly, but I talked about a lot of this already. So fixed loot, so especially this year, I guess we just talked about this. Reduction of damage multipliers. So I talked about just many builds way too OP. We have like so many damage multipliers and defensive slots and these kind of things. I think this is not how it should be. This needs to come down in some way. And yeah, the numbers are through the roof. We have trillions of damage and trillions of DPS that people do. Like, we were promised a stat squish and we got the exact opposite, to be honest, man. Like, it's absolutely insane to me. And something needs to happen here. Uber content. I didn't talk about leaderboards and conquests now, but this is a much requested feature that we have been hearing about for years at this point, and people are waiting for it. You know, we want leaderboards. We want something to kind of like show our worth, you know, you want the season start races, you know, this kind of stuff, you know, something that gets people going. And even for the people that don't have, you know, all day, every day to blast, there could be some cool stuff included here to kind of like slowly grind up their character and then eventually participate in like a pit leaderboard, for example, or for people that only take off like the, you know, first 1 or 2 days of work to blast the season start, you know, they could go for these conquests. So there's like the D3 style where, you know, at the season start, there's like, you know, the first 1,000 people that complete a certain challenge gonna be, you know, on the leaderboard there and these kind of things. I think we need a mix of both. That would really keep things more exciting, you know, a lot more like action going on when the season starts. And I think everyone would just love that, to be honest. Even if people don't necessarily participate, because obviously there's only so few people that can be on the leaderboard, especially high up. But people just love watching that stuff, at least from my experience. Like, this is literally what I have based my entire career on in the past, like pushing rank 1s in Diablo 3 and this kind of stuff. This was my kind of jam. And this is literally how I built my entire stream and my audience, basically. I think the demand is there, and please, Blizzard, do something here. Yeah, meta progression, something I guess briefly talked about, like for example with Nightmare Dungeons, customization, you know, something to like work towards, maybe in a similar way as like the Altar of Rights from Diablo 3 or the Atlas passive tree from Path of Exile, you know, something to kind of work towards as like an overarching goal, as something that, you know, either changes the content that you're playing in some way that you want, or that even like buffs your character in specific ways and that you want. So there could be a lot of stuff here that could be very interesting to kind of give us, you know, some long-term progression outside of just this one character that you're playing. And okay, we have the Paragons, but I think that doesn't really count. You know, Paragons are somewhat of a joke after like 200 anyway, and you reach that very quickly. So this is not what I mean here with meta progression. I mean, you know, an actual system that should get introduced here that would actually alleviate this. And lastly, my wish list here would be corruptions. So if you know Path of Exile, there is a currency called Val Orb that allows you to either upgrade or modify an item in a very specific way or destroy the item. And especially that last part is the interesting part here. I think that, you know, with like the abundance of, you know, loot that we have in Diablo 4 with like, you know, I have like 20 copies of, you know, the same 1GA daggers with the right stats in my stash, and, you know, I could just temper them all and masterwork them all, and, you know, I could do so much things with like all these items that I have like 5 copies of every single unique that I need for my build with, you know, the right stats, the right GA and this kind of stuff. Like, what I do with all this stuff, I have no purpose for them. And I think it would be amazing if we had something where we actually have a chance to gamble on our existing gear, especially our finished gear, and, you know, have a chance to add something cool to it at the very last step, or potentially, you know, destroy it. So I think we need a lot more, like, you know, items getting kind of like flushed out of the economy, basically, and not just like 1,000 copies that drop over and over and over. Like, I want to feel happy about getting a copy, like a good item that I already own. And then, you know, I know, okay, now I have this thing that I'll use, and I have the other thing that I can, you know, try my luck with to make it even better, you know, that kind of stuff. And that is also just completely missing. And especially with like how the loot system works in Diablo 4, I think this would be an exquisite addition. I guess I've been talking long now. This is almost a 1 hour video. So I just wanted to give all my feedback about Season 7 so far and the game overall, what I think and what I hope we would see as improvements here in the future. So let me know what you think about it. I've talked a lot now. I didn't really get to talk about everything, but yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff to digest anyway. And I've also been forwarding a lot of stuff to the devs, or I had like, you know, certain talks with them, or, you know, whatever. Here and there, there's little tidbits that I share with them. And I guess here we have like the big wrap up as well for what I think about the season. Now, what does it mean for me for the rest of the season? Well, I still have at least some more days to go. So I'm currently working on Spiritborn. I might make a Sork. and we'll see, maybe something else. And then I might jump into some Diablo 3 this Friday, and then it's probably gonna be back to PoE 2 until, yeah, I guess mid-season patch or something like that. So this is currently my plan at least. So yeah, hope you're gonna stick around for that as well. Otherwise, I hope that you enjoyed this video here. Again, let me know your thoughts and whatever topics I missed or what you agree or disagree with. I'd be quite curious to read that. And I'll see you guys next time.